At the edge of the Namib Desert, beside the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, Namibia is attempting something extraordinary. This landscape looks almost empty, but the wind here is powerful, the sunlight is intense, and beneath this vast, sparsely populated region, a new industrial vision is beginning to take shape. Namibia wants to turn renewable electricity into green hydrogen and then turn that hydrogen into green ammonia that could be shipped to industrial customers thousands of kilometers away. At the center of that ambition is Hyphen Hydrogen Energy. The proposed project carries an investment of more than $10 billion and is planned on roughly 4,000 square kilometers of concessioned land in and around the Soucab National Park near Lüderitz. If everything goes according to plan, the project could eventually produce around 2 million tons of green ammonia every year. That sounds enormous, because it is. But there is a much harder question. Can Namibia actually build it? To understand why this project is here, start with the landscape. Southern Namibia combines exceptionally strong wind resources with some of the world's most attractive solar conditions. For hydrogen production, that combination matters. Solar power is strongest during the day. Wind can continue producing electricity at different times. When the two complement each other, an electrolyzer can potentially operate for more hours of the year. Hyphen says the project area is among the world's strongest locations for combining wind and solar resources for low-cost hydrogen production. And Namibia has another advantage: space. Large areas of land are available for utility-scale renewable development. That matters because a project like this isn't simply an electrolyzer, it is an entire energy system. Hyphen currently describes the project as two major phases. Each phase is planned around approximately 3.75 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, feeding approximately 1.5 gigawatts of electrolyzers. Together, that implies around 7.5 gigawatts of renewable capacity and 3 gigawatts of electrolysis at full development. That is not a single hydrogen plant. It is a renewable power system, a water system, a hydrogen production system, an ammonia plant, storage, pipelines, roads, electrical infrastructure, and an export system. All of those pieces have to work together. And that brings us to the first challenge: water. Green hydrogen is produced by splitting water using electricity, but this project is being developed beside one of the driest landscapes on Earth. So the plan depends on the Atlantic Ocean. Seawater can be taken from the coast and desalinated. The purified water can then be sent to the electrolysis system. Renewable electricity splits that water into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen becomes the foundation of the project's export product. Hyphen also says it plans to provide water to Lüderitz to help meet increased local demand associated with the project's development. But desalination adds infrastructure. It requires energy. Pipelines have to be built, and the entire water system has to operate reliably alongside the hydrogen plant. So even before the first kilogram of hydrogen is produced, another industrial system has to work. The next challenge is power. Electrolyzers consume enormous amounts of electricity. And this project is designed around renewable power rather than conventional fossil fuel generation. That means thousands of megawatts of wind and solar capacity must be developed, connected, controlled, and integrated with hydrogen production. When renewable production rises, the electrolyzers need to use that energy efficiently. When production falls, the system has to respond. That relationship between renewable generation and electrolyzer operation will heavily influence the economics of the project. Hyphen also says excess electricity could potentially be supplied to Namibia's grid, helping reduce reliance on imported electricity. So the project's power system could eventually matter far beyond the hydrogen facility itself. Once hydrogen is produced, another problem appears: transport. Hydrogen is difficult and expensive to move over long distances, so Hyphen's strategy is centered on converting much of the hydrogen into green ammonia. Hydrogen is combined with nitrogen to produce ammonia. Ammonia is already traded internationally. It can be stored in large tanks. It can be transported by ship, and it already has established industrial uses, particularly in fertilizer production. Hyphen is targeting international markets, including Europe, Japan, and South Korea, so the journey could eventually look like this: Atlantic seawater, like desalination, a renewable electricity, electrolysis, hydrogen, ammonia, storage, port, ship, and finally, an industrial customer thousands of kilometers away. But every arrow in that chain represents infrastructure that has to be financed and built. And that makes Lüderitz extremely important. Producing green ammonia in the desert is not enough. The product has to reach international markets. That requires storage, loading infrastructure, marine facilities, shipping capacity, roads, electrical connections, and potentially major upgrades to supporting infrastructure. The hydrogen plant, therefore, cannot be viewed in isolation. The project succeeds only if the entire corridor succeeds. That is one reason Namibia's broader Southern Corridor Development Initiative matters. Hyphen is intended to be the first major project within a much larger green hydrogen development strategy for southern Namibia. Now we reach perhaps the biggest challenge: capital. Hyphen says the project requires more than $10 billion of investment. That figure is roughly comparable to Namibia's annual economic output. Projects at this scale don't move from announcement to construction simply because the technology works. Developers need engineering studies, environmental approvals, government agreements, infrastructure planning, financing, equity, debt, and customers willing to sign long-term contracts. The Development Bank of Southern Africa has previously agreed to support project development work leading toward final investment decision. And Namibia's government has gone further. In December 2024, the government completed the acquisition of a 24% interest in Hyphen through the SDG Namibia 1 structure. That gives the government a direct financial stake in the project's success. But a government stake does not eliminate project risk. The remaining capital still has to come together. And then comes the question facing almost every major green hydrogen project: who signs the contract? A technically impressive hydrogen facility means very little if there is no customer willing to purchase the output at a price that supports the investment. Hyphen has previously signed memorandums of understanding with potential customers in Europe and Korea, targeting more than 1 million tons of green ammonia annually. That demonstrates market interest. But memorandums of understanding are not always the same thing as binding long-term offtake contracts, and that distinction matters enormously because lenders want certainty, investors want predictable revenue, and buyers still have choices. They can compare green ammonia from Namibia with projects being developed in the Middle East, Australia, Latin America, the United States, and elsewhere. So Namibia does not simply need to produce green ammonia, it needs to produce and deliver it competitively. This is where hydrogen economics become more complicated. A headline hydrogen production cost is only one part of the equation. The buyer ultimately cares about the delivered product. That can include renewable electricity, electrolyzers, water treatment and hydrogen processing, ammonia conversion, storage, port infrastructure, shipping, financing, and project risk. Every additional step adds cost, and a project of this size may take years before it reaches full production. That means Hyphen is effectively making a bet, not just on today's hydrogen market, but on what global demand for low-carbon ammonia will look like toward the end of this decade and beyond. There is another dimension that cannot be ignored. The project is being developed within an environmentally sensitive region. Hyphen's concession covers land within the Tsau Cabe National Park. The company and the Namibian government have emphasized the need to balance development with environmental protection. Environmental and social assessments, therefore, aren't minor administrative steps. They are fundamental to whether the project can proceed. Meteorological masts have already been installed to gather wind and other environmental data as part of the development process. That tells us something important. Despite the enormous numbers associated with Hyphen, this is still a project moving through engineering, environmental assessment, and validation. It is not yet a completed hydrogen megaproject. Hyphen says the project is progressing through front-end engineering design. Its published development schedule targets project validation validation and final investment decision before major construction begins. The company's current published timeline targets approximately 1 million tons per year of green ammonia in the first phase, followed by another 1 million tons in the second phase, reaching approximately 2 million tons annually by the end of 2030. But those are targets, and that distinction is important. A planned project and an operating project are very different things. The hardest phase may still lie ahead. Financing has to close. Engineering has to mature. Environmental approvals have to be secured. Infrastructure has to be constructed. Customers have to commit. And thousands of individual components have to function as one integrated system. If Hyphen succeeds, its importance would extend far beyond a single hydrogen plant. Namibia could establish itself as a significant producer of renewable fuels. New electricity infrastructure could be built, port infrastructure could expand, industrial activity around Lüderitz could increase. Hyphen estimates approximately 15,000 jobs during construction, with thousands of permanent positions envisioned once the project reaches full operation. The project could also become the first large building block in a much broader green industrial strategy. And that may ultimately be the bigger story. Namibia isn't simply trying to export hydrogen, it is trying to use its renewable resources to create an industrial sector that largely does not exist today. From ReneEnergy's perspective, Hyphen illustrates something fundamental about the green hydrogen industry. The electrolyzer is only one component. A viable project requires the complete system: resource, land, water, electricity, infrastructure, technology, capital, offtake, logistics, and economics. A weakness in any one of those areas can affect the entire project. That is why evaluating hydrogen projects requires looking beyond announced electrolyzer capacity. At H2 Hub, we are building tools designed to help examine those project development questions, from site screening and technical concepts to economics and risk. Explore the platform at h2hub.reneenergy.com. So return to the Namib Desert. The wind is still here, the sunlight is still here, the Atlantic is still here, and on paper the ingredients for a major renewable hydrogen industry appear unusually strong. But turning those resources into millions of tons of exportable green ammonia requires much more than renewable energy. It requires billions of dollars, massive infrastructure, customers willing to commit, successful engineering, environmental approvals, and years of execution. If Hyphen succeeds, Namibia could demonstrate that a country with extraordinary renewable resources can build an entirely new export industry around green molecules. If it struggles, it may also reveal just how difficult gigawatt-scale hydrogen development really is. For now, the world's attention is focused on a remarkably ambitious project on Namibia's Atlantic coast. And one question remains: can Namibia pull it off?